were talking about how important it is to you to stay in touch with the people and the community and the ecosystem and the people who are using the things that you work on and the company works on, who you work for. Was it hard to be able to find jobs where you had access to open source and community?
Yeah, I mean, so like being in open source, at least I would say, like I've seen a lot of things changed over a decade. Like interest, you know, everyone is doing like some version of AI now. It's like a lot of things going on. Um, so at first, to be fair, I was gearing up to go to MIT. I mean, it was no brainer. I was working on the project. It was crazy. So that was like my path to go to the US at the beginning stage. But of course, there were things that were very personal to me that that sort of hindered it. But in terms of opportunity and jobs, I did realize that it was very US centric. A little bit, there's some aspect of European influence at that point. But I would say like working in open source as a job was very something that you would naturally see within the US, especially with the big companies, right? The idea of working in open source in startups wasn't a thing back then, because of course the web wasn't that crazy. There were not a lot of interactive web applications enough for startups to be a thing. So the other aspect of open source was very different. It was like language based, desktop based, that was some kind of weird thing going on. So it was very, the space I was playing in wasn't the most welcoming space. It was the most niche space, the way to put it. I feel like it was the most experienced, the most people with more opportunity, people that are based in the US. In fact, like Linus himself had to move to the US, to give you that kind of concept, right? It's like it was very slim. In Africa, it was, I said, that's the worst place you want to be at that point. It is changing now, but to do anything related to open source, I mean, the government used Windows, for crying out loud. Right? The chances of you running into all of that's computer was like crazy. Like even if now, like Linux is powering everything, like no one cares. So it's like it was really, really difficult. So I took it upon myself to remain as independent as I can. So I spent like most of my life contributing to Sugar. I was able to be compensated in some level. Sometimes I take on projects. Sometimes I work on some things. Sometimes I work with some governmental related things that are related to what I was doing. So I was able to find a way around, making some money. And then eventually, and then obviously, like, open source started becoming a word that everyone wants to use, right? And as people started building things and wanted to use developers to build things, that version of open source started kicking in. So I think with your experience that I already had, building community back then, working with community, like just basically the concept around it kind of placed me in a position where like I was kind of like desired. And even at that peak time, it was still very US focused. Like all the jobs, all the opportunity that I get, even at some point, Google, again, still US based. It was very difficult. In fact, even still staying in Nigeria at this point is just me being stubborn. Because every single time, at some point in my career, I keep saying, oh, okay, like every single time, either my current job or the next job I want to get, I was like, oh, you always go to the US. Why not just stay in the US, right? I mean, that might change in the future. Not sure. But it was very difficult. It wasn't the most desirable role. Like I mentioned, I was the core engineer. I wasn't like writing code to send people to the moon, for example. So it wasn't that type of engineering I was doing. It was more like open source developer kind of a thing, like that sort of thing. So that was kind of like what I was working on, and I think that sort of gave me an ideology. So the way I was able to help myself more was now taking that evangelist opportunity to write, to speak, to relate, to teach, because I used to teach a lot. I even taught some couple universities back home. I've worked for like couple organization, like likes of the UN, like ITU, so and then some governmental folks. So like I was able to do other things that sort of like complement my skills in open source, and then that naturally started putting me in the DevRel uh, radar. Even if I'm not, I don't like doing the typical DevRel stuff, but it sort of placed me in that radar where I, yeah. So I think that's kind of the hack I need to position myself enough to sustain my career for this time. Being specifically intentional about the role that I want, while still staying away from where to get the jobs or where the jobs are being created.